rainy, cold evening and windy.
Jamie,
Welcome to the Larkspur City Council meeting. It is January the 16th. It's 6:30, and Jamie just left.
she's on her way back, right?
No
I
worries.
see her coming.
Hi, Jamie. Jamie, would you like to do the roll call?
Councilmember Hilmer,
Here.
Vice Mayor Chu,
Here.
Mayor Morrison.
Here. If you're able to, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
More things just to go run to do.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you. I'm going to reach out to the public. Is there any public comment? Anyone like to say something that's not on the agenda tonight? All right, I see none, so I'll move on. We have a presentation from the Chamber of Commerce. Kyra, would you like to come up and say a few words?
Hi, good evening, all. I'm Kira Nickel. I'm the Assistant Director of the Larkspur Chamber.
Is the mic on?
So before you, there are too many copies because I didn't realize you'd have them prepared down here. So go, just leave on through.
Great.
All right. We support Larkspur. Where is the overhead? Right behind me? Oh, see it. Okay. We support Larkspur business. The Larkspur Chamber unites businesses, local
It'll come
leaders,
bright
and
in a
concerned
second,
citizens of
warming up.
Larkspur, Greenbrae, and Canfield with the mutual goal of achieving a better and more prosperous community. Larkspur Chamber of Commerce Review, period April 1, 2018 to January 15, 2019, presented to Larkspur City Council, January 16.
Yeah. Kara?
Yes.
Is your microphone on?
Probably not, is it? Or
It is? Can you speak into the
I'm not used to
microphone?
this. You
Great,
can well
thank you.
tell. There we go. All right. Is that better?
Thank you.
All right, I'm sorry. All right, we're on the second page now. 2018 in review. Members, 61, 19 new members. Annual retention rate, 80%. Events, ribbon cuttings, and mixers. GOTS roadside ribbon cutting, February. Summer mixer, June. Wine stroll, July. All county mixers, or chambers mixer, July. Gather wine ribbon cutting and mixer, September. Business citizen reception at City Hall, October. North Magnolia Wreath Walk opening event, November. North Magnolia Wreath Walk, November, December. Bon Air holiday event and mixer, December. This page obviously is about the wine stroll with this photograph reflecting this year. The 2018 downtown Larkspur wine stroll, 540 attendees, 10% increase in traffic over 2017. 2019 downtown Larkspur wine stroll, July 20th, 2019. The Larkspur Chamber of Commerce hosted the first annual North Magnolia Wreath Walk. November 10 through December 31, shoppers visited the stores over the holiday shopping season to see specially decorated wreaths and like their favorite wreath for the People's Choice Award. And these wreaths were on the Facebook, and people would vote for their favorite, as it were, and the West America won. Rumor has it that they beefed up some kind of social network to get more votes. We don't know. Print campaigns, holiday 2018. With the $5,000 purchase of SF Gate digital promotion for 2018-19, Larkspur Chamber received $5,000 for free print advertising in San Francisco Chronicle. So please make note of that because it's really kind of a colossal deal. We spent $5,000 and got $5,000 additional. So Print 13 ad insertions, 1/2 page and 1/4 page, promoting Wreath Walk, Shop Larkspur, Holiday Mixer. Total readership, 223,544 per week for 12 weeks, North Bay and San Francisco, at no cost to Chamber. And these were the samples that appeared. Digital campaigns, Holiday 2018, SF Gate, digital promotions contract split into Holiday 2018 Facebook campaigns. 2019 Story Studio feature, online advertorial story about Larkspur Chamber members. Holiday 2018 Facebook campaign through November-December promoted Wreath Walk, celebration event, 7 weeks of Wreath Walk, Merchant Wreaths, Shop Larkspur, Holiday Mixer. Results reached local audience, 145,000 impressions, generated increased likes for Chamber Facebook page, RSVPs to events, visitor sharing of events on their Facebook pages. And they're very nicely laid out for you to see. It's not in this thing, but I wanted to say how nice it was of the city to donate the sign, to designate North Magnolia so people could actually see that area, because it's this lost space between downtown and Woodland Market. And I believe the city also donated the wreaths for the lamp posts. That was very, very much appreciated. All right. Plans for 2019. Shared focus on member recruitment and retention. Continue to add member benefits that attract new members. Create additional value for current members to aid in member retention, including Larkspur Chamber Facebook page. Chamber Facebook page available for free to help promote Chamber member events. Larkspur Chamber event calendar. Chamber event calendar available for free to help promote member events. Story Studio, digital campaign, online advertorial story about Larkspur Chamber members. Free benefit to members, 30-day digital feature with SF Gate, 500,000 guaranteed impression targeted to North Bay audience, includes interviews, video, links to member websites, permanent online presence for ongoing member marketing issues. Increase in board of directors size and meeting frequency, added 2 new board members in 2018, 3 additional board meetings added per year for 2019. We felt by adding additional meetings, it contributes to the continuity and flow of current concerns and ongoing concerns of the chamber at large, and we want it unites us better and closer into achieving more goals for our businesses. And that is our presentation.
Great.
From last year to this.
Great. Thank you. Council members, do you have any questions to ask? Kira?
Thank you for all your work.
Thank you very much. It's been a real honor getting to know this area more intimately than, because I've literally walked all the areas. Minimal the industrial area and the Cost Plus Plaza maybe 2-3 times, and then way out by the Marriott and those buildings. They know me pretty well. Downtown knows me very well, and as the North Magnolia. So I'm kind of like a walking symbol of the chamber, and that's what I wanted to be. It's important.
Larry, do you have a question?
You had mentioned you have an 80% retention. Do you have any sense of why the other 20% is not coming back?
I've asked, and they just, on the spot, their response is, oh yeah, I forgot to do it. I forgot to renew my membership. So that's what I get in person. I don't know, except for one guy flat out said, he said, quite frankly, for the money I'm putting out, I can do better on my own. That was the only one where I got that answer. But the rest of them kind of sashayed around a bit. So.
I guess it'd be interesting if that's what the others feel, if you ever get that, is, you got all these campaigns that you have. There must be some way to quantify what, the benefits
Yeah, and
are.
maybe I'm not doing a good enough job on the ground of promoting all that digital stuff, because it's powerful. It's what the world uses now. And we do reach the median age is a 45-year-old woman, and we've met reaching them. There was some data-driven study to show that this group is very powerful in shopping, and we have reached them. So that's good news.
Yeah. So what do you want to achieve in 2019?
Well, we'd like to increase our membership. I think that would be really, really important. And continue on with that North Magnolia Wreath Walk. The opening day, it was the fire and all the smoke. So it really cut down overall, people's curiosity. They didn't want to go out and deal with smoke in the streets, which was a doggone shame. I think if we could back them again, we're not going to do it as enormously because they can pick up the ball now, but that would be exciting. And we're thinking of adding perhaps some other kind of something to go with the wine stroll to bring in additional revenue for us. So we're working on that. It's kind of exciting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming
And if
tonight.
you have any other questions, please let us know. And Vicki, of course, can do a whole lot better than I can.
Great. Thank you, Kara.
Thank you all.
Okay, take care. All right, we'll move on now to approval of the consent calendar. Would any of my colleagues like to pull anything from the consent calendar? I see none, okay. I'll go out to the public. Anybody from the public like to pull something from the consent calendar? Okay, I see none. I'll bring it back to have a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Move to approve the consent calendar.
May I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? I see none. It gets approved. Great. So now we'll move on to the city manager's oral report. Dan Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. A few items for you. First, I know it's shocking I'm going to tell you this, but it's raining. Kidding aside, it's raining hard and tides are supposed to be up right now. And they're going to be high this week. And as you know, that's the worst combination for Larkspur. So staff's working very hard to be prepared. Those of you who live in areas where that combination has led to water in the streets, do what you need to do to prepare. We have sandbags at Piper Park and Heatherwood Park. Encourage folks to take advantage of that. I was in San Rafael for part of today, and they were out clearing storm drains everywhere. We're out monitoring wherever we're finding debris that's plugging up storm drains. So hopefully we will marshal through without any damage to property, and just encourage everyone to be safe. On focus for the city operations, very sadly, we have a vacancy on the library board, and hope that applicants will step forward. We've had some folks express interest. Jimmy, when's the due date for that? Friday, February 8th is the due date to apply for the vacancy on the board. Also, we've had members of the community asking when and if the council is going to take up issues around telecommunication regulations that are specifically geared toward the 5G issues. As you know, we've told the council we have already provisions in place that we feel are fairly strong, but we've been evaluating what other communities have done. And staff is working with the city attorney's office to bring modifications to the ordinance to the Planning Commission at one of its February meetings. If it goes to the Planning Commission in time, we'll bring it to the council for the second meeting in February, but it's possible it'll be the first meeting in March, depending on the process through the Planning Commission to adopt revisions to our section of the municipal code. So, but we are working on that, and you will be seeing that soon. And lastly, I keep having to sort of tell you this, and I admit I'm frustrated, as is my counterpart in Corte Madera, Todd Cusimano. There's one hurdle left for the final blending of our fire departments in the Corte Madera Fire Department or Fire Authority, and that's that we need to get what's called the preliminary actuarial study for a new CalPERS contract from CalPERS. We've been told that we will have that in time for our Fire Council meeting in February. It's required that the public be given an opportunity to review the actuarial study for 2 weeks, and then for the union to employee union to review the actuarial study and then conduct a vote on the contract. They've assured us they'll have it in place, so assuming we can trust those assurances, then now we're looking at moving the personnel into the agency on March 1st. So with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Dan. Any questions for Dan from the council? No? All right. Do we have council members' oral reports and comments? Anybody? Dan? Elmer?
Briefly, the Ross Valley Flood Zone 9 Advisory Board met in this chambers last night. Julian Skinner was here on behalf of the city and did a terrific job explaining the benefits of the improvements for the Hillview neighborhood and the bridge project, some of the process and clearance issues, environmental issues. Also, there were members of the Hillview neighborhood here that were really helpful in identifying issues for their neighborhood relative to Flood Zone 9 program. And Arlene Fox, in particular, submitted a list of questions and comments that I think captured the city's and that area's interests very well on behalf of the community. So I just wanted to let you know, and I'll try to get a copy of that for the council.
Great. That'd be great. Thank you. Larry, you're set? Okay. Last Monday, we met here with Kevin Harf, myself, and Dan Schwartz, and the Larkspur Library Community Center Task Force, and it was quite enthusiastic. It was quite contagious. We're very excited about starting the fundraising for that. Actually, they have started, and they're in the process of putting together a website to promote the task force, and they're going to go have a GoFundMe and all types of ways to fundraise and for the community to give to that purpose of building a new Larkspur Library and Community Center. We also worked on a timeline for the fundraising, along with, we're going to have a discussion in February on how the city of Larkspur is going to financially contribute to the task force to keep it going. So it was quite an informative meeting. Dan, you want to add anything to that?
No.
Okay, great. We'll move on. We'll move on to public hearing. 7.1, the Marin Sanitary Service Contract Amendment and Rates for 2019. So we're going to have a public hearing.
Yes, Madam Mayor and council members, I'm going to tee this up, and then I get to turn it over to the representative from R3, which is always great, because then I can let him do all the talking. This is a public hearing for the council to consider establishing the rate for sanitary service, which is waste collection here in the city of Larkspur. And as is indicated in the staff report before you, the proposed rate increase this year is 8.52%. The proposed rate increase, it's recommended, be applied across the board to residential, multifamily, and commercial service accounts. That's been your practice for several years, and we recommend that you continue that. You'll note, if you've had an opportunity to go through the report, this is the culmination of a process that I've been telling you about periodically over the last 2 years, where Larkspur and its partner agencies that work with Marin Sanitary Service have been looking at the methodology for calculating the rates. And we have worked with the company and agreed on a new methodology that we think will be better in the long run for creating predictability and stability in the rate structure and allowing us to work together to have a better and more efficient operation between the agency and the provider. This action that you have tonight includes amending the actual franchise agreement to recognize the new methodology that was used. R3 is the company that was retained to work with us and to help us create this methodology. And I'm going to actually ask Garth Schultz from R3 to come forward, and he's going to do a presentation for you about the rates and about the methodology. So with that, I'll turn it to Garth.
Thank you, Dan. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, council members, staff, representatives of MSS, and the public. I'm Garth Schultz. I'm with R3 Consulting Group. We're a small boutique firm that works exclusively for municipal agencies on rate matters and other matters of solid waste policy as they pertain to obligations that are carried by cities and towns and local governments throughout the state. We don't work for the private haulers. We didn't work for Marin Sanitary, though we do certainly understand their business quite well. So I was the primary analyst on this project, and I'm going to cover a few major things that have kind of occurred over the last year that you may have heard about in the news as a part of this presentation. Starting from the beginning, though, when we're talking about Marin Sanitary's rates, we are talking about the sole compensation to the company from the ratepayers for the services that are listed here on the screen. And these include not just the basic garbage and recycling and green waste collection from homes and businesses on a weekly basis throughout the city, but it also includes other types of services that are provided, on-call pickups, illegal dumping support for the city's compliance with state laws, which have been increasing over time. There's a number of services that they provide, and the rates are the sole compensation for that. And the rates cover everything except one thing right now, and it's recycling. So back in 2013, with the last update to your rate methodology, recycling processing, so the cost of collecting the recyclables door to door is included in the rates, but the cost of processing and marketing that material to get it onto the international marketplace for these commodities was not included. It was specifically carved out and held in this kind of separate accounting position, wherein there was a net balancing that was happening every year. Now, with recyclables, you've probably been or heard of the recyclables processing facility in San Rafael that Marin Sanitary Service owns and operates. When you process recyclables, you're taking all those mixed materials that folks put in their bins curbside, and you're separating them back out so you can get the glass and the cans and the paper separate. And there is a cost to that, an operational cost with labor and utilities and capital equipment. And 6, 7, 8 years ago, the net revenues that were generated from selling the recyclables offset fully and generated a net revenue above the cost of processing those recyclables. Well, in the last several years, that's changed, and the company had accumulated a net loss of around $6 million, of which around $3 million was held in this separate account, subject to resolution at some point. Sorry, it was $3 million and then $1.5 million. I doubled my numbers inadvertently. Regardless, there were some significant losses that accrued over the course of the last several years because the commodity value of recyclables has declined over those prior years. Cost of recycling processing was maintained fairly well. There was some minor increases for labor increases and the like, but the end result is rather than generating a net revenue, recycling has become a net per ton cost. And this was driven more substantially in 2018 via the Chinese national sword, which you've probably read about in the Marin IJ. It's been on the news. It's been a pretty significant matter of public discourse in the media. So we had a couple of tasks as a part of this, both the rate adjustment for 2019 and then the rate methodology was both to resolve and deal with this prior recycling loss concern, but also reincorporate the cost of processing recycling back into the rates. And what's before you in terms of the rate recommendation does address that. The company agreed to waive 2/3 of the losses as a part of the negotiations. And then we built into the rate structure an incentivized mechanism wherein they have every incentive to maximize how much they can earn on the marketplace for their recyclables. So there's both this incentivization, the resolution of prior recycling losses, and that amounts to, for this coming year, a cost of around $40 per ton to process recyclables, which is still less than the cost to put it in a landfill, and it's less than the cost of composting organic materials, for example. So it's still a good deal, but it is a difference from what you've experienced in the past and what ratepayers have seen. Going forward, and I'll talk in a moment about the new methodology, but this is something where what we have done as a part of this negotiated outcome is fix the costs of recyclables processing with a CPI escalator on that, but then allowing the revenues to adjust to what's happening in the marketplace, so that if revenues increase, if we have a rebounding of the recyclables marketplace, new markets are discovered, more revenue comes into the company, the ratepayer shares in that benefit. Likewise, if they don't recover, things stay the same, and if for God help us if it gets worse, the ratepayers would be sharing in the risk of that as well. I don't think that's a significantly likely outcome, but it's unknown. This is a brave new world for recycling right now, unlike anything we've seen in the last 30 or 40 years.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
Just so I can keep up.
Yes.
You said the cost of recycling would be fixed, yet the ratepayers would share in the risks if the market were to...
You have two elements to
that?
the net cost. You have a processing cost, which is the labor and capital and utilities, and then you have the revenue element. So we're fixing the processing cost piece and allowing that to escalate with the CPI escalator. The revenues are unknown. We have a projection for this coming year, which is included in the rate base. But depending upon what revenues are actually received in this coming year, that will then change what the formula says moving forward. So we're really only changing that net revenue, or the revenue component, yielding to a difference in a net cost.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Thank you. And if I do go too fast, feel free to slow me down. I'm trying to be respectful of your time. So we addressed prior recycling losses. The company made concessions. We've developed a new methodology moving forward, which is competitive within the marketplace. And that all ties into what you're probably really concerned about, which is what is the rate adjustment for this coming year. Now, under your existing agreement, before you amend it, if you choose to do so tonight, you had a rate process which was prescriptive. Every 3 years you'd have what is called a base year review, and that is what this year was. In setting the 2019 rates, we used the base year review methodology, and this was the schedule for it. It's based on the actual costs of running all of their operations. It starts with their prior year's financial statements, their year-to-date expenses, and projections for the rest of this year and into the coming year. The company prepares that in an application, and then the Marin Franchisers Group set of agencies that MSS serves engaged us to conduct a detailed review of that. So their original application, which didn't include any treatment of the recycling costs I just mentioned, was around 14%. When I calculated what that would look like with full addressing, with no concessions on the recycling losses, that could have been as high as 21%. Through the process of review and negotiation with the company, they and we identified opportunities for savings, and then there were also further negotiated outcomes as a part of a meet and confer process, which was triggered by this recycling loss issue. So where we're landing for the city of Larkspur is an 8.52% increase, but that includes resolution of the prior recycling losses and wraps recycling net costs of processing into the rates moving forward. Now, what this looks like for Larkspur individually, I'll mention in a moment, but this, overall MSS's rates for 2019 compare favorably to the average for 2018 for the rest of the county agencies. And we expect those to rise. There have been significant trends in Bay Area and in California with rates increasing, and there's essentially a pressure cooker happening. We've got this recycling markets change where China's forcing us to internalize economic impacts that they were previously dealing with in terms of their environment. We've got increased amount of consumption. Though residents, businesses, all of us are doing a better job of recycling and composting, the net amount of waste that we generate every year continues to increase, and the state's focusing on this and is being very diligent about it. But we are generating more. That's more for them to collect. It's more trucks on the road. That's another driver to this. And then there is increasing state legislation requiring more recycling, more composting. There's a net cost to providing those additional programs as well. And I'm going to read off a list of some of the other increases that we've seen just in these last year and a half. Piedmont's rates went up 60% last year. Santa Rosa's went up 60%. Windsor's went up 40%. Half Moon Bay close to 50%. There's a longer list there. What I'm trying to indicate is that with this 8.52, it may be above what you've grown accustomed to as a part of an annual rate adjustment. We are correcting for that moving forward to create more predictability, but this is not out of the context of what's happening in the more regional and global solid waste and collection marketplace. This is what it looks like overall. So Larkspur's is right here, middle bar there. Yours is a little higher. You have a fixed streets or fixed vehicle impact fee, which does make you a little bit higher in comparison to some of the other green agencies. Everything in green is a part of what we reviewed as this project with the Marin Franchisers Group. Everything in blue is Mill Valley Refuse Service, which services Corte Madera, Tiburon, Belvedere. They saw rates go up between 13 and 18% last year, and we expect that to continue again. Tamalpais Community Services District, government operated, had an 18% last year, and other plans for, I think, a couple more 10% rate increases. What I am going to call out is the anomaly in here, and those are the two in red, City of Novato and West Marin. Those are serviced now by Recology, but previously by an outfit called the Ratto Company. And Ratto's assets were bought last year by Recology. As a part of that process, I was a part of a team that got to review the financials of these two operations shown here in red, and can attest to the fact that they were not operating, or their rates that they're charging as low on this chart was not covering the cost of service. Those operations were running at a loss. That loss was funded by other separate operations outside of Marin County. So those they very much are anomalies. Novato and West Marin do and should expect those to go up sometime in the coming couple of years. And that is, of course, bringing this overall average down. The bottom line here is that you're not out of whack with the average within the county, and this is a trend that we're seeing elsewhere in the industry, locally and regionally. Now, folks will want to know what's driving the rate adjustment, what's driving the increase at 8.52%. It's important to understand that most residential customers subscribe to the 32-gallon garbage container. The rate is charged based on garbage container size, but it's inclusive of all the bundled service, recycling and organics, and all those other ones I listed. The primary driver is labor. This is a part of the fact that this is a base year review. The last couple of years were indexed based, and so it wasn't truing up their costs to what actual was. And it was using a CPI index, which is good. It was in the favor of the ratepayer, but there is a catch-up period in that, which we're in here now. But there are also other new positions that the company has proposed and has been accepted by the Marin Franchisers Group as a part of our review. A new HR director, the company doesn't have one, and they've been advised strongly that as a company of their size, they should have one to be able to ensure for greater management and capacity. With the recycling market change, there is a greater focus on contamination in the recycling stream. So they propose a contamination auditor, but that does come with a revenue offset as well. That will be a revenue generating position. And then there are also some outreach and education positions, other types of labor impacts that weren't previously included in their rates, which were proposed and reviewed, adjusted, and then ultimately recommended at this amount. The recycling costs that we mentioned are around 77 cents a month of the total. There's minor increases, standard increases for maintenance and profit. And then landfilling and organics processing, which is outside of the company's control. They collect what's at the curb, but then they deliver those materials to Redwood Landfill for composting and processing or landfilling. And they do have a per ton increase every year, and then also just more tons to dispose of on an annual basis. Government fees contribute a smaller portion, and then fuel and oil also was actually a somewhat significant increase in these last couple of years. The price per gallon went up about 42% between 2018 and 2019. So those are the major drivers here. Overall, folks also generally want to know what's baked into the rates overall. What do the rates look like? Over half of it is labor and the processing and disposal of your waste. Government fees comprise around 13% overall company-wide. Maintenance and fuel around 9%, capital about 9%, operating costs, administration, legal fees, the like, 9%, and then profit as an overall component of the rate is 8%. Now, having heard what you've heard about where the rates are going for 2019, what's been recommended and why, to talk about what the future holds for the city and for the company's application. So as I mentioned, you have this existing agreement where every 3 years you do a base year review set on costs, whether you like it or not. It's prescribed, and you have an interim 2 years of what is called an indexed review, but is still very largely cost-driven. Very time-consuming both for consultants and for the city staff and for company staff to enact on an annual basis. What's been proposed in the exhibit to the new amendment to the agreement before you very much streamlines that, simplifies it, makes it less costly, and really relies primarily on the majority of their costs for their operations tying to a simple CPI market index. It's one that's called water, sewer, trash. So it is specific to these types of utilities, and it would be capped at 5% per year with a floor of 2.5%. So really moving forward, this indexed rate adjustment would be the default. And every 5 years, either the agencies or the company could request to do a base year review like we've done this year, but it's not mandatory. Neither party requests it. The indexed adjustment can continue on until such time as a base year adjustment is requested. My estimates is this is essentially a 90% decrease in consultant fees, staff time, Marin Sanitary Services time. This index is one that anybody can look up through the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Yes?
To get back how ratepayers may benefit should markets, either existing or newly discovered markets,
Yes.
Come into play. Explain how the benefits are shared as you're indexed now, increasing rates.
So the majority of what the index is going to cover is Marin Sanitary's operations. The processing, disposal, and recycling of waste is held outside of that because there are elements that are outside of their control with respect to the amount of generation. So that would be held outside, and there's a specific methodology for calculating the net cost of processing recyclables that's put into the exhibit. Again, the processing cost is going to be fixed and escalated by that same CPI, but then we're going to look at what were the revenues for the most recent 12 months and use that to offset that processing cost. So if revenues for the most recent 12 months were higher than what was used for the purposes of establishing this, the net cost per ton will decrease. The net cost per ton that's in this rate is $40 per ton. If revenues increase in 2019, that net cost of processing will go down to 35 or 30, depending upon how much markets react. And then that translates into what the ratepayers are paying. So there's that, it's directly tied to the revenue that they receive.
And those net savings are passed directly along to the ratepayer?
That's correct.
Thank you.
This methodology does still retain the base year adjustment, which I mentioned, but again, it's not mandatory. The index could continue in perpetuity if neither party requests to do a base year adjustment. And that would be similar to what we did in this year. Other things that you may have heard about in the past, such as a complicated true-up mechanism, which was difficult to explain, those are all going away. There is no true-up. And the biggest thing to understand is that your existing processes have been cost-based rate setting, wherein costs changes for the company yield changes to the ratepayer. And every year, except a base year review, this is going to be a revenue-based. You're going to say, this is what the ratepayers are going to pay you, and if your costs for operations change, that's really for them to manage within a revenue number. If you've ever done a home construction project, it's the same thing. You expect them to manage within the budget that they've given you. This is what this looks like moving forward. And again, they're for illustration only. I'm not telling you what your next few years' worth of rate adjustments might be, but I am showing you some realistic opportunities or potential. The top chart is a middle scenario where I'm using essentially the average rate of increase in this index for the last 6 years, which was around 3.7%. Government fees just get calculated based on a specific formula depending upon agency. Processing will change in the way I described, which is actually their costs for that, because that's external to their control. But given standard rates of increase for tonnage and for the tipping costs and modest increases in revenue to recycling and 6-year average annual performance in this water, sewer, trash index, your rate adjustments between 2020 and 2022 will range somewhere between 3 and low 4%, whereas you've seen 5s more often on average recently. Now, if this index, if the market were to change and the index were to come in at 5% or higher, it'll still be capped at 5. The lower chart essentially says if people generate a lot more material, if the cost of them processing and disposing of that goes up significantly, if there is no change in the recycling revenue marketplace, and if that index comes in at 5% every year, you'd still be looking at low 4s to mid 5s. And I think that's more of a worst case type scenario that you might expect. So it is more predictable. It's very easy to calculate and will be a lot more explainable moving forward. Please.
Just for my own, again, I'm trying to keep up. Sorry if I'm slow.
No, that's fine.
The year 2021 on the lower chart, explain the 0.75 part of the 5.75% at the bottom.
Because the index is only applicable to the MSS operations component. Processing
Got it.
is tied to really what if folks if Larkspur, everybody disposes twice as much next year, that's twice as much for them to collect and then dispose of. They're not going to get made whole in that collection, although I imagine they might be coming to talk to you if that really happens. But their cost to dispose of that at Redwood landfill is outside their control. They have more tons, and they have a per ton rate that increases. So the cost of landfilling, composting organics, and recycling are in that processing line. So that's not subject to the index. Really, the big chunk, which is their operations for collections, that's capped at an index.
Thank you. I just wanted to isolate that.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, there were negotiations around this. This wasn't just a strictly formulaic exercise. There was a lot of negotiating around terms and conditions and magnitude of rate and what's in the rate adjustment. The company did make concessions. There were other benefits that were secured, performance commitments by the company, which are a part, I believe, of the amendment before you. Quantitative metrics for achieving diversion goals is something that the parties committed to. An option to conduct periodic performance reviews of the company, and an obligation now that you are compensating them via the rates to process recyclables, ensuring that that continues at their existing facility here in Marin. And importantly to note, there was no change to overall services. That was an option that could have been considered, but really you have a real great package of services provided by this company. It compares very favorably to elsewhere in the Bay Area. All current services are maintained via this proposal that's before you. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
No, thank you.
I got a few questions. Hi, thank you.
Hi.
Going back almost to the beginning, when you were talking about recyclables and the price, not getting as much, things like that, is there now a supply of stuff that is not being diverted, or are they just paying less money?
It's a little bit of both, and the company can speak with more surety around this as they're the handler and processor. But globally, for the clients that we serve throughout California, there certainly is less money. There is also an element of things that China is considering to be contaminants, and now the rest of the world is considering to be contaminants, low-grade papers, low-grade plastics that just don't have a commodity outlet anymore. So certain things that we were previously really trying to get recycled, they're just not buying. So there is a bit of that in this as well. There is a little bit less recycling, but I think the company can tell you they're still moving the main stuff. I mean, there's still movement in that marketplace. Things are still getting recycled, but some of the lower-grade materials just don't have a home anymore.
So really what that means is that any attempts to raise the level of, or reduce the level that goes in the landfill, really not achieving that then, if the demand isn't there for lower quality recyclables.
That is correct, and that's the reality that this industry globally is going to face for the next 10 years. And part of that is driven by the fact that the products and packaging that we all get has substantially changed, and so it's going to be driving a bit of upward pressure to the manufacturers. But that is correct. This is a bump in the road to reducing the amount that goes to landfill.
Oh yeah, you just look at our delivery economy now. You get an item that big, but it comes in a big, huge box and all the packaging and the whole thing.
Yep.
So, everything's really tied together in a lot of different ways. When you've looked at our market, you've done this study for Marin County. How much of the cost of what we pay is tied to the level of affluence?
That's a good question. In terms
Because
of how much you pay on your rates, or
they're consuming more.
Yeah, there is definitely a correlation between affluence and consumption, but it's also seen in less affluent communities where there are more disposable materials being used, less dishwashing, for example. So, I don't think it's that one-to-one, but certainly we do see a bit more consumption and more need for solid waste services in more affluent communities.
Yeah, it just kind of hit when I looked at, the chart you had on page 4. If you strip out Larkspur's road impact fee, then it pretty much correlates to the communities with a higher level of disposable income are generating, well, they're paying more for their trash, which suggests that they're generating more trash.
That could be the case. I haven't studied that in extensive detail, but I think there are some correlations there.
Okay, so just one last question.
Councilmember Chu.
Uh,
I'm not a scientist, nor am I a recycling expert, but I would suggest that if it weren't for the huge volumes of yard waste that are included in the diversion rate calculation, we would be shown as the truly wasteful society that we are here in Marin, just as a qualitative description.
And that's true statewide.
So now when you look at your methodology, you said something that kind of didn't sync up, but I'll just figure that, it's in there somewhere. You said half the cost are labor, but on your chart it shows about 39%.
Sorry, I was summarizing. Half the costs are labor plus the processing. So those are the two largest contributors, amounting to half of the overall rate.
Okay, so how much of this new rate methodology places a component strictly on the fixed cost? Because no matter, it's like the U.S. Mail Service. It doesn't matter how much mail you have that day, the guy still has to basically go down the street and go to every house. And it's the same thing with garbage collection. So even if we reduce what I personally put in a can, it's not going to make it any cheaper to get to my house.
Yeah. So your point is that, largely around 75 to 85, depending upon the community, is about 75 to 85% of the rate is largely due to fixed costs, running the trucks, paying the labor for those trucks. The marginal element of what the cost is of processing and disposing of your waste and recycling versus somebody that does more or less than that is very minimal. What can be said, though, is that everybody were to reduce 25% of their waste stream tomorrow, that's fewer trucks on the road that they have to run. The trend's going the other direction, but that, there could be economies of scale being gained if everybody did it, but not necessarily for an individual ratepayer.
So right now, if you say the level's at 85%, is the rate structure based on the 85% reflecting the fixed cost?
We don't isolate those two. I'm speaking in terms of what the reality is, in terms of those fixed costs of running those trucks amount to 75 to 85% of the overall fixed cost of the operation, and the only real variable cost is what they're disposing of at the end. By and large, the rate structure is not set up to ideally isolate those on an annual basis and reevaluate those. It's really looking at the whole pie.
Yeah, but that's really where it should be if you want to get a true cost of how the consumer can make the difference. And it also gets the consumer to understand that, even if you reduce half your trash, it doesn't reduce, your garbage bill by half.
That's true. And it's a possibility to look at the rate structure in Marin County further. That's not what this exercise was set up to do. It was more adjustments to those rates to keep up with the cost of operations. So the structure's been largely fixed for some time.
That might end up being a more fair way to evaluate, Marin Sanitary as well.
On a structure basis?
Well, structured the way I'm suggesting it.
Yeah, potentially. I'd love it if somebody were to engage us to do that. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great questions. Yep, Dan? Of course.
Last question. There are changes around us, around Marin Sanitary, requiring others to go to dual stream, changing the context in which you're operating. How are those impacts?
You mean in the Mill Valley pilot project that's ongoing right now in Corte Madera and elsewhere?
Well, I just think that things are changing, going that direction. How's that going to impact this topic?
It won't necessarily impact your rates in MSS's operation because they have that dual stream program. And when I mentioned the $40 a ton, Patty, I'm sure will want to tell you, that compares very favorably to even other dual stream operations like the cities of Berkeley, where it's $80 to $100 a ton, or single stream, all in one bin recycling operations where we're seeing rates as high as $180 a ton. So I think for you, that maintaining that service that's been put in place is going to just essentially shield you from some of the overall larger rate impacts that might be out there and experienced by others. Folks are looking to the dual stream model that you have and looking to go back to it from where they were, they may have shifted away 10 or 15 years ago. So I don't think folks are looking to you as leaders ultimately.
Well, I think, this is not for tonight, but I think energy markets and other opportunities I think are going to unveil.
There's a whole brave new world. I
So
agree.
this isn't a dead end here.
No, not at all.
Thank you.
I hope not. My question is, how are you going to continue educating the community? the
That would be a
constituents?
question. That would be a question for the company, as we're the rate reviewer as a part of this process, working on behalf of the local governments. That part isn't part of our role, but I know they can speak to that.
Okay, I'd like to hear that. Garth, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sounds like
Did you want to invite the company to
Yeah,
speak?
well, Patty's coming up now. Patty, would you mind discussing that? And Patty, can you tell us how Larkspur alone is doing? Are we recycling more? Are we doing composting? Do you know that offhand?
I can get you the specific numbers tomorrow in terms of what your diversion rate is. And I just want to introduce to you the team that I've got here with
Sure.
me today. Roger
do.
Williams is our CFO. Kim Shively takes care of our regulatory environment. I know she's been working with Dan on the Cal Recycles issue and can handle the questions on education as well. Jennifer Grenier is here, and she, as you saw, went out and offered to join your Larkspur Chamber of Commerce and takes care of outreach in terms of mostly multifamilies and commercial. And then, of course, I have my faithful assistant, Joe, here with me as well. I do that at every meeting. Getting to your question specifically, I was getting some numbers to give you an example of how paper has dropped off so that you understand how we got here. Paper in general has dropped revenue per ton about 22%. Cardboard is down 26%, and that mixed waste paper, all of that stuff, the junk mail and so forth that we all get in the mail has dropped off 94%. So that's how you see that we get to where we are, where we have to come and ask for now a very healthy regulatory environment for the recycling center. It should be noted, and Garth mentioned this, that we are dual stream. I'll tell a very short story about my dad in a flanking jurisdiction being called a dinosaur for having held on to dual stream recycling, when in fact the whole issue around China has multiple. There are multiple reasons as to why China's whole ability to take or want to take our waste recyclables has closed the door. But most of it is the single stream facilities, and this gentleman was describing a single stream facility. Well, lo and behold, now 20 years later almost, Dad was right. Dual sort was the only way to go, obviously. He's been a genius in this industry for a very long time and a leader, and now it's coming back around. And new contracts are being led in areas where they go out to bid in, and they're seriously thinking about dual sort recycling. So he's worth keeping around as my faithful assistant. So if I may just broadly, and I'll cover a couple of your questions as well and ask him to come up. We're very much in favor of this new rate methodology, but Larry, I would really like to hear more about your idea. And I'm sure that Garth would as well, in terms of going forward into the future and making things fair. At one time, Cal Recycles did say that Marin County, just a bit above the others, but generated overall, if you put waste, green waste, organics, and recyclables all together, a higher amount per capita of waste production, and that comes with affluence generally. One of the benefits of this new methodology is that it's easier to explain to the public. So we're very excited about that aspect of it as well. Getting back to the dual stream, and again, Garth had mentioned this, many of those other jurisdictions are paying $80 to $130 per ton to process recyclables. But in this presentation, in this application, ours, we're proud to say, is coming in at $40 per ton. So that whole dual stream question is very much ratified in that number. One thing that I'm always sensitive about, it looks as though we go in for 13%, but we come back and are happy with 8.5. It should be noted that that's a snapshot in time. When we submit on August 1st, numbers change afterward. For instance, workers' compensation came in a bit lower, county JPA fees came in a bit lower, so it's more fluid in the negotiation session. It's not that let's ask for this, and then we get that and are happy with it. Kim, if you want to come up and talk about the public education, one of the things I would also, and I'm wondering if, Joe, do you want to come up and talk about markets? Because that was a question that was asked as well. We celebrated last year 70 years in business. One of the things I want to point out is that Roger, Joe, and I, and 37 other folks in the state are instructors in the Next Generation program. And we've actually crafted a course that's accredited through Sac State to get ready the next generation for the complexity in this industry. It doesn't seem like it's complex. It's pretty complex. So we're very proud of that. We have 13 graduates. We're going into our 8th year. We're happy to be here. We will continue to be here. We're not resting on our laurels, and we continue to provide high-quality service we believe in. So thank you so much, and I think Joe will end with markets. If you want to talk about education, that'd be great.
Thanks, Patty.
Mayor, council members, staff, thank you. How will we educate the public? It's a little more challenging right now with everything changing day to day. We're experts, and we still wake up every day and say, can this really be recycled? And we don't know. These are commodities, and they're markets. Just because you put something in your recycling container doesn't mean there's someone who will buy it. And another important thing for us all to remember is that because they're commodities, supply and demand, if we buy products that are made from recycled content, you increase the demand for that product. So just because we buy the recycled, the bottle that we're putting into recycling doesn't mean that that loop is going to stay closed. So first thing we are doing is an actual full detailed letter, first time to customers, explaining this new methodology, and then trying to explain what services and programs are covered in that monthly bill. So hopefully the letter has gone out to San Rafael so far. They had their rate hearing in December. We had one customer call and say, thank you, that was a really thorough explanation. Okay, it's been one, I have 30,000 customers, but I'm going to take that as a good thing.
I'm sure there are others, hundreds.
Yes, there's probably thousands. The other big thing that we're doing right now, which is we've been working on for the last few months, is an app, and we're relaunching our website. We're completely redesigning the website. But the app is going to be called Where Does It Go, Joe? And the public, you can type in anything you want, coffee cup, flag, mic, and it'll tell you if it can go in one of your curbside containers, if it can be dropped off at a drop-off facility, or if it can be donated. So it's a lot. The database will be changing daily, probably for a while, until right now we have about 300 items in it, but the public can also suggest things that weren't in that. No tinsel's not in there yet, but it will be, because I've been getting lots of questions about what can I do with my tinsel. The other thing that we're doing is we're getting ready to launch a really exciting outreach, education, and monitoring tool that's called the Recyclist, and that will help Marin Sanitary Service better help Larkspur in maintaining its compliance with the state recycling and organics mandates. Our database that we have now was built for routing, customer services, and for billing. It was not meant as a outreach, education, monitoring, compliance tool. So this new database will help us do that in a much easier manner.
I have one more.
Uh-huh.
So I just received a box and it was full of the styrofoam bubbles.
Yes.
Or the little, yeah. Is MSS ever going to ban that or write a letter, have it banned, or do you
Well,
support that ban?
yeah.
We've done that over the years, and what will happen is the plastics industry, styrofoam industry will come back and react and say, well, they're just not working hard to recycle them. But the truth is, they just are not recyclable. They can be reused. You can drop them off at the FedEx, Kinko's place, and they should reuse them. But typically what's happened in my 31 years here is that if you were only in Southern California, there would be a market, but you're not in Southern California. My Southern California colleagues will say, oh, yeah, you're only in Northern California, we can recycle them in Northern California. So it's
It's a
grossly
shame.
misleading, which is too bad.
Okay, great. Thank you. Joe, you going to come up and?
Can I, Madam Mayor? Sure. While Joe's making his way to the microphone, I would just like to make a comment that my experience very recently on my street with my Marin Sanitary Service hauler, or several of them, that handle the different streams. I live on a substandard street. The pavement width is about 14 feet wide. And in that 14 feet is one side of on-street parking. So the remaining space left for everything else is probably 8 feet. And I know that the system is designed for the trucks to, the driver to stay in the truck and use the arm to reach all the cans on the street. And I've watched the system change. The drivers still have to get out of the trucks. Every can is handled by hand. The patience that the drivers show on my street and the courtesy that they show everyone on the street. The kids come out in the morning and it's their thrill of the week to watch the garbage trucks and point at them and yell at them. And it was the same with my kids 30 years ago. So I just want you to know there's a lot more to this picture than what you're allowed to include in your costs that I think go to the relationship and the quality of service that I don't want to take any of it for granted. I just want you to know I understand how important all of that is in detail.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that very much. I'm going to talk about the markets, and I want you to know that we're still selling to China. We're one of the very few companies that will accept our material. Well, we gave them yesterday, they're going to get the same thing today, tomorrow it's the same thing. Usually what they'll do, they'll line up 100 bales of paper, 100 bales of cardboard. That's 5 truckloads, semis. Then they'll pick out 3 of each, break them open to see if there's any glass and garbage in there. They don't do that with us because they mainly, it's still a stream and they know exactly what we do. As we've gone along when this thing first happened in China, 2 things besides the sword came out, restricting garbage going to China. And you can't blame the Chinese. They were baling actually, and they still are, baling cardboard, because when you put everything into one container and you squeeze it on single stream, it's all in there. It breaks into the paper, the wine smells, the oils, you name it, it's there. Ours is clean newsprint and clean cardboard, and that's really important. We've added extra machinery to shake as much, flip the papers over so the glass comes out, and it's like fine glass in the end, and it just goes down to a separate container. But the other thing you have to remember that 5 years ago, the newsprint weighed more than double what it weighs today. There's nothing in that paper. I get 3 papers a day. They don't weigh what the Chronicle weighed 5 years ago. In addition, there's less people using newspapers. They read the paper on their phone. So there's a lot of changes there. But nevertheless, we've kept up. We're doing the job. We're proud of it. And the main thing is that when you sell a commodity to somebody, if they want bananas, give them bananas. If they want apples and bananas, you can do that too. But we ship what they want, and it's clean, and we're proud of it. Other people are going to Pakistan, they're going to India, Mexico, any place that they can get rid of it. They're just going to have to change their systems to such a degree, and you're talking multi-millions of dollars starting all over now to make it clean. Otherwise, we might as well dump it. And I would say the majority of companies that pick up 100% recyclables, 60% goes to the landfill. If there's any other questions, yes, Dan.
Could you, it may not be relevant to the topic tonight, but could you explain where you are and what you see in the future of the fats, oils, and grease sorts of food waste converting to energy. The
Well,
Central Marin Sanitation's increasing the capacity of their facility to accept those things, and I just wanted to know how the contamination issue and everything is playing out.
Well, there's already people picking up just the oil already. That's a separate operation. We're picking up all the food from the restaurants and the grocery stores, and it's about 15 tons a day. Then we bring that down to the sewer plant. They mix it with their material, and they're making methane gas, and they power the whole plant. And that's working. In large areas, like at the dumps in down just past Oakland, the big dump up the hill up there, they're actually fueling their garbage trucks with methane gas at that dump. But you've got millions and millions of tons that have dumped there for years. Now, this dump in Nevada, there's not enough garbage in it. They do have pipes in there. They do take the gas out. They're using a minimal amount on their own facility. So more technology is coming out, and it'll develop. My hope is that we can develop mills back in the United States, and there's one going up in Washington State now. They used to have mills in Oregon and Washington. The problem with that was we polluted all the rivers. The fish couldn't see their way in or out, let alone you swimming in it. Now they've cleaned that up, and if they put the right machinery in to filter the product as it comes out of their recycling process, then we've got a chance to keep the papers here and not ship it thousands and thousands of miles away to somebody else.
Yeah.
But we're not shipping garbage to anybody.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Congratulations on 70 years. Any more questions for my colleagues? No?
Oh.
All right, I'll open it to the public. Anybody from the public like to discuss? Come on up, James.
James Holmes, Larkspur. I wonder, Mayor Morrison and Council, if it would be more helpful to segregate out this year's and then the proposed methodology for next year and going forward. Those are a little bit different. I think most of the comments have related to this year's. But anyway, would it be more helpful for me to address that or to address them all together, which would be necessarily a longer presentation?
Yeah, let's keep it short.
Well,
In fact, James, you know what? I'm going to start using this.
Well, since we're dealing
3
with
minutes, I forgot.
since we're dealing with two different types of, basically two very different things, it's, as I say, actually they should be considered separately, really, this year's and the subsequent ones. So I think take that into account. Anyway, this year's increase would result in rates almost 15%, 14.9% in 2 years, and I think that's extreme. In 4 years, the rates have increased nearly 25%. My 20-gallon rate, 3-year rate, went from 89.79 in 2015 to 110.76 in 18. That's an increase of almost from $90 to $120. This year's continues that pattern, and it makes it worse. It's basically the usual 5.5% plus the 3% for the negotiated increment for the recycling fund. Larkspur's rate is far higher than most of the other jurisdictions on the chart here, which you saw. It's of the 15 jurisdictions charted, only 3 are higher. 1 is essentially the same, that's the county, and 11 are lower. That doesn't seem right. But of particular interest is Corte Madera, because Corte Madera is so similar in terms of both size and topography to Larkspur. Corte Madera's already had their rate, by the way, rate increase. And so you see a vast difference between Corte Madera and Larkspur. And I think this is something, I think Larkspur should zero in on this and ask, why are we so different than Corte Madera? They're 2 different providers, and why are those 2 different providers' rates so different? As it happens, we have the same consultant for both Corte Madera and Larkspur, so they might be able to illuminate that. But the question I have to have is, does Marin Sanitary have higher costs and higher profits than the Corte Madera provider? As for the increases in other jurisdictions, most of those jurisdictions don't have dual sort recycling. I'm concerned about costs being possibly inflated or maybe not the kind that should be transferred to the ratepayer, such as a recycling auditor or a personnel manager. I think the benefits accrue primarily to Marin Sanitary and should not be passed on to us. I continue to be concerned with costs that may result in affiliate transfers. I didn't see that discussed here. I have to wonder, did we pay for this puff piece? I'm sorry, that's what I have to call it, but this piece here that went into every publication in Marin County and, has 5 pictures of Mr. Garbarino in 4 pages, I have to wonder, did the cost of this go into our rates? In sum, I think there are a lot of missing issues and unanswered questions and undisclosed information, and I would urge the council not to approve the rate for this year. Now, with respect to the
James,
May I
just
ask a
moment for
question?
yes.
You kind of tossed off in your remarks earlier the comparison to all those that have dual sort operations. Of those you're comparing to, if you were to look at just those that have dual sorting operations like our provider, how many are above and below in a rate comparison?
I don't know, but my impression is the comment was made that a lot of the providers are receiving high rate increases, and I said most of those high rate increases are for the ones that do not have dual sort.
Well, I was just trying to keep up in your characterization of Larkspur's rates being drastically higher.
Yeah,
when I saw where it landed on that chart, it was in the middle of the highest and the lowest. And I just wonder, if you mentioned zeroing in on the distinction, I would also like to make that distinction that we should be compared to those that have, or Marin Sanitary, our provider, should be compared to those that have similar operations.
Oh, I agree. I agree. But and I don't know whether Corte Madera has dual sort or not. But I mean, the ones that are customarily having the high increases now are the ones that do not have dual sort because they have more contamination.
And they're catching up with.
Well, their situation is worse than ours. So we should actually have increases that are far less than theirs.
All right, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Continue.
No, I with regard to, I appreciate
James,
that.
can you wrap it up?
Well, I would like to talk about the new methodology now. Again, there are 2 separate questions before the council. I support the goals of simplicity and transparency and also moving away from the cost-plus approach. However, it appears to come at a high price under the proposed methodology because that methodology could allow up to 25% rate increases in 5 years. That's the highest amount, but given past experience, we should assume that that's not unreasonable. And that 25% excludes the so-called recycling and processing costs because a large portion of that is excluded from the expense cap, I think. And these are the most rapidly rising costs. So the likely increase may be much more than 25%. Under the new approach, it's unclear to me at least as to whether or not these processing costs are applied to the expense cap, whether the expense cap applies to processing costs. I don't think it does, and I think that they should be included. I think the expense cap should apply across the board. I'm also concerned that the new methodology provides for an automatic escalator. Especially troubling, I think, is the concept that we need to give Marin Sanitary an incentive to get the best price for recyclables. I think they should be required to get the best prices in order to keep the net cost down. With regard to the proposed cost index, it seems flawed because it includes water and sewage, factors that seem to have little to do with the garbage costs. And we know in our case, water and sewage is going up as much or not more than the garbage. So I question this index. In general, is the proposed methodology you're being required or requested to accept, is it supported by literature and experience in other jurisdictions, or is it an experiment just for Larkspur? What other approaches, I have to wonder, do other jurisdictions use? I think that should be taken into consideration. And finally, with regard to the new contract specifically, I think it should give the city clear authority to resolve consumers' complaints. Consumers can't take their business elsewhere, so the city is the only last resort, and they should have clear authority to address and resolve consumer complaints that cannot be addressed at the Marin Sanitary's level. I believe it has been the practice for the city to attempt to do that, so it was told by the city manager in 2013, but I think that should be explicit in the contract. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Garth, do you want to answer any of those questions?
Before Garth speaks, I might like to take one of them, Madam Mayor. As you know, I sit as your representative during these negotiations. This year, I worked closely with R3's team and then my fellow managers from the other towns. The manager of Ross, Joe Chin, and I have experience negotiating garbage contracts in other communities, and both of us, I think he'd be comfortable with me saying, had not experienced the methodology that was in place here until we got here. The methodology that we're proposing is much more in line with the methodologies I had experienced in the past. I suspect that you're about to hear from Mr. Schultz that this is a common methodology. And what I also wanted to comment on is the past methodology forced the agencies and the garbage company in a far more adversarial role after the fact, after the year of business had occurred, which is a very difficult conversation for both parties to create a healthy process moving forward. This new methodology is designed so that the agency and the company are working together to create ways to control costs ahead of the year coming up. And so for me, that is a much healthier thing for the ratepayer long term. Now I'll turn it over to Mr. Schultz.
Good explanation.
Madam Mayor, I just wanted to say I attended both the beginning of the process with
Just to comment really briefly on the power just turning off, staff's been receiving direct bulletins from PG&E. I understand as many as 2,000 people in Corte Madera and Larkspur, 2,000 homes were without power. They mobilized crews today, so there are crews all over the North Bay trying to address these. I think that's why you saw the power come back. So I want to applaud PG&E today because I can't remember a storm in the past where I've been receiving so much real-time information about what they're trying to do.
I just want to say my experience is consistent with the way the city manager has described it. I attended the beginning of this process as well as tried to follow along, including tonight's presentation. And I can say the way that this has been handled in reaction to a process that previously was just so confusing, nobody could really, it was very reactive, which created
other similarly complex rate methodologies that we could have put forward, but it wouldn't have achieved the overall goal. And then in terms of the best prices for the company, the incentives for them, we know that they're doing a good job with that. It is administratively very complex to require them to do that because then that entails a certain amount of monitoring to ensure that they're meeting those requirements. The reason we built in the incentive is that so that they actually have, in order to make sure that they're covering their operational costs, they've got to be able to generate more. And essentially what we're doing is they're not being compensated 10% of the processing cost of recyclables while being able to retain 10% of the revenues, and that's that incentive, keeping in mind that the costs are still greater than the revenues today, so they have a real incentive to maximize those revenues. And I think, the other ones I don't have a direct response to, but I just wanted to clarify in terms of the process that we developed.
Thanks, Garth. I know. Larry?
Yeah, with respect to pricing, I'd already mentioned, like we have a road impact fee. Yeah, that adds a little bit. How much is different when you have differences in topography and street capacity? Like, you look at Dan Street, they have to drive smaller trucks with lower capacity.
In communities that can make a difference within Marin County, other than San Rafael, which is so different than most just in terms of size and the size of the commercial and industrial districts there, most of the others, it's not that huge of a difference. If you're exclusively a hard to service, very rural, very hilly community, you have so much time between pickups, you have more downtime and less productive time. They can make a difference. I don't see them as a primary driver of the difference, both within the Marin Franchisers Group area or that Mill Valley service area. It's not a huge indicator in these cases.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else?
Just to clarify Councilmember Chu's comment, they do not drive different trucks down my street. It's the same big truck. It's just that there's a more intimate relationship between the neighbors and the driver. We know them by name. We give them Christmas cookies. It's very personal.
I've seen
Sure,
smaller
Becky
trucks
does.
up in the canyon, though.
You will see some of those in those areas just to make sure there's safe access and operating for canyons and the like, yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'll bring it back to the council. We have two resolutions to look at. We have resolution number 219, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Larkspur setting rates for garbage and recycling collections. Any questions? I see none. Do I have a motion or,
I'll move the staff recommendation.
okay. We have a second?
Yeah, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone oppose? I see none. We'll move on to the second resolution, Resolution 319, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Larkspur approving the Second Amendment to the amendment and restatement of collection agreement of the City of Larkspur with Marin Sanitary Service.
Yeah,
Any questions on that? No?
I'll move to
Make
approve
motion?
Resolution 0319.
May I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
No one opposes? It's passed. Great. Thank you for a wonderful presentation and informative one. And congratulations again on 70 years of service. We appreciate it.
I would just like to add one little thing.
Sure, come on up to the, we have to hear you.
We're helping the people in Corte Madera Valley. We've got a new program, pick up bottles 1 week and we pick up the things next. But all their recyclables that have been picked up for the last 2 years, they haven't dumped the entire load at $80 a ton because no one would accept it. It's so bad. So there's a lot of other little things they need to do.
Yeah, we understand that.
Thank you all. You too, Dan, appreciate it. Take care.
Bye. Have a good night. Stay dry.
Yeah.
Get home safely.
Yes, absolutely.
I got a little mixed up on the resolution numbers. I forgot that we had started a new year. I'm going 219. Which one is it?
All right. May we just take a 3-minute break? Are you guys okay with that?
Sure.
All right. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to, we're going to start with the business items. Right, we have 8.1, Preferential Parking Program parameters. Let me find my 8.1. So, council members, we have for a discussion, in fact, Dan, you're going to start, and there's 4 questions that we need to answer to staff. So I asked Dan to discuss the questions, and then we'll give them an answer, okay? So may we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. The council will recall that you adopted an ordinance essentially establishing the ability to create preferential parking areas within the city. And the ordinance establishes that these preferential parking areas can have parameters set to them and that those parameters will be established by resolution for each of the areas as you look at them. At the time that we brought the ordinance forward, we initiated with you a discussion about what those parameters generally should be, and if some of them, if not all of them, should be uniform across the city whenever you would look to establish these areas. Subsequently, we had a public workshop on October 17 to discuss staff's thoughts about what these uniform parameters might look like. It was an hour-long workshop. It had a hard stop attached to it, and unfortunately, the council wasn't able to deliberate a little bit and provide direction to staff about the parameters outlined in the report that was for the workshop. The reason being, there was extensive public comment provided to you, and there was a healthy engagement with the public about issues not only around these parameters, but issues folks are facing in their neighborhoods that they might subsequently want to pursue having this program put in place in their neighborhoods. We provided a link to the video from that workshop so that folks would have an opportunity to hear the public engagement. We brought this item back so that the council now could take up this discussion and address questions, the 4 sets of questions that the staff had outlined in the report. I also, with this report, provided some additional thoughts after listening again to the public workshop and also taking into account some comments and feedback that staffs received subsequent to the public workshop. Perhaps to make this discussion go smoothly in terms of these different issues, because they really each can be answered individually. That's not necessary to take them all up and discuss them at once. If the mayor, I talked with the mayor, and I think it might be the easiest if we take up each question one at a time so that you have an opportunity to discuss those.
Regarding enforcement, is the enforcement standard or model one that's complaint-based, or is it something where there are regular patrols?
So what I anticipate will happen is that when we initially establish an area, there will be a period where we'll ask the police authority to do some patrolling, primarily to educate the public that the new parameters are in place. After that, it would become a complaint-based system.
Thanks.
And Dean, I have a question too. Since the new regulations and rules at Redwood High School, has that made a difference?
The new regulations at the high school, the best that we can tell, have reduced some of the problems that are related to the kids kind of racing off at lunch, but we are still observing kids parking in 2 of the areas adjacent to the high school area, one being the Marina neighborhood, the other being William Avenue. Those seem to be the 2 that are getting the bulk of the problem.
They're parking in Heather Gardens too, and close to Heatherwood Park, so they can go into that access to the high school.
And
That too.
okay. Those 2 are the ones that I think continue to experience high school impact. We haven't seen it as dense in either one of these areas as it may have been in the past, but it's definitely a present issue. And you have some late mail from both those neighborhoods, actually. So a reminder, though, this item is not about approving any restrictions tonight. This is about setting the parameters so staff has guidance to then bring forth specific restriction programs for particular areas and particular neighborhoods. So we'd like that guidance so we have a better idea what the general parameters of the program will be. So the first one that staff seeking direction from the council is how does a neighbor go about asking to have a preferential parking system put in place? And we looked at what other communities were doing, and our recommendation is that either a petition that's been signed by 75% of the owners of affected properties be submitted, or a homeowners or property owners association that represents the affected area could make the request, as they would obviously represent 75% or more of the affected property areas. In our mind, that seemed like a good threshold, having looked around before staff would take up the question of whether there ought to be a preferential parking area.
How does one establish a boundary within which you're assessing the 75%?
So the ordinance doesn't speak to that, and that's a question the council can address. We haven't thought to address that because we wanted to allow, the point of the 75% threshold is to initiate the question and the process with staff, and staff would conduct an analysis. Our analysis might be one thing if you have an entire contained neighborhood, like a Marina neighborhood or Heather Gardens is a contained area. It might be a very different analysis if 3 homes came forward and said, we want restricted parking in front of our house. I think you'd get a different feedback from the staff because what we took direction from the council before is the parameters are particularly around issues that it should be public policy oriented. Is there a safety concern? Is there a health concern? Is there the inability of the neighborhood to come and go in a safe manner? We've heard from some of the folks in the Heather Gardens neighborhood that one of the possible problems is, given the tight nature of the neighborhood, particularly on William, we're seeing cars encroach into people's ability to get in and out of their driveway safely. So that would be something staff would analyze and say this merits some consideration. But in my mind, the staff would come to you and say, these 4 houses on such and such a block want preferential parking, but we couldn't find any real public policy concern. They just want it. And I think that would be a reason to deny the application.
Madam Mayor, the reason I'm asking about the boundary is both a process issue and as well as maybe something to see that where somebody would just draw the boundary around closer to the group of people who agreed with them in order, and then present that to the city as if it were 75% of an area. I think there ought to be principles around which you can establish a boundary reasonably that would capture the parking impacts. Like there ought to be some ground rules.
I welcome your input, Councilmember. My take is that I couldn't think of how that was logistically feasible, so I think the burden shifts to staff on the analytical question to say, it appears that you drew these boundaries in a way to get 75% of the people to sign it, but you didn't draw boundaries that actually reflect the area that's the problem. I don't know how else to do it. I don't know how you can
That's fine, as long
create
as there's an
regulatory scheme.
understanding.
I'm not ever super excited about this type of